Hi, everybody. I'm Erick Galinkin. I work at NVIDIA. I'm also the chair of the CVE AI working group, which is fun and exciting. So I'm going to provide a little bit of an update on what we've been doing in that group. This will probably be short and sweet, so I am hoping and expecting you to have lots of questions. Otherwise, the next presenter is going to be upset with me, right? So when we're thinking about our problem space, right, what we're trying to do in this working group and what the CVE program is trying to do with respect to AI, right, how does the increasing adoption of AI and machine learning impact the assignment of CVEs? Basically, every enterprise is trying to adopt AI, whatever that means. For most companies, it means paying a bunch of money to OpenAI or Microsoft or whoever. I just want to get in on the Microsoft slander, right? And a question that I have, right, is does it have an impact at all, right? Are these just good old-fashioned vulnerabilities and we know what to do with them? Or are they a little bit different? Is there something we need to do, right? We're also trying to figure out what the scope of the CVE program is with respect to vulnerabilities in AI models, systems, and applications, right? So one question that comes to mind for me immediately is, what does it mean for a model to have a vulnerability? In a lot of ways, models are just data, right? They are just the parameters of a network. They don't actually do anything, right? A model itself doesn't execute code. It needs to be part of a larger system. A model itself doesn't generate anything other than, tokens, right? Or make decisions, make classifications. So what does it mean for a model to have a vulnerability? Is this even a term we should use with respect to models, right? Our system-level vulnerability is like command injection introduced by models functioning as intended in scope. So say you have a model that, or you have an agent that, I don't know, runs bash commands for you. You tell it what you want to do, and it runs it for you, right? Well, if you get an outcome that you didn't desire, right, or if you expose this thing, right, too broadly, and the model works as intended, is that in scope, right? So all of these things can come up, right? I think a good example for the system-level vulnerabilities comes from one that we talked about back in March, where there was a classifier that was basically using an image of your face to authenticate you. And the question was, right, if it misclassifies the person, if you pass it an image that's not of you, but of somebody else, and you authenticate to their account, is that a vulnerability, right? The model is functioning exactly as it's supposed to, but should that be CVEable, right? And very clearly, I want to highlight that not all issues with AI models are in scope for CVE, right? There are a lot of risks associated with these models. They go well beyond what we care about as security practitioners. So we want to clearly define as clearly as possible when concern should be addressed outside of the CVE program, right? Where are the boundaries for this is CVE and this is not CVE, right? Provide guidance on that front. So in terms of the progress that we've made so far, it's mostly administrative, right? We created a charter, named a chair, established a meeting cadence. So all the things that you need to do to be a proper CVE working group, which is great, right? We're pretty active, we're pretty excited, and I think so far everybody in the working group is really, really motivated, which is nice, right? Everybody's really eager to get stuff done. We've had a couple weeks of discussions about large language models that generate vulnerable code. So the question essentially is, does an LLM that generates vulnerable code merit CVE assignment to that model, right? And you can have a single model that generates both secure and insecure code. So it doesn't always generate insecure code, but sometimes it does, right? And if we wanted to do this, we would kind of have to turn to statistical methods, right? We'd have to develop some kind of test for testing whether or not a model falls under that paradigm. And historically, CVE has issued any kind of statistical or probabilistic analysis with respect to vulnerability assignment. Should that change? I don't know. But that's what we're discussing, right? Ultimately, CVEs are for recognizing vulnerabilities and holding code providers accountable, not data providers, not all the time anyway, right? And ultimately, CVE IDs are not assigned for poor LLM responses. So, if you ask it to prove that the square root of 2 is not rational, and it does that for you, which for those of you who don't love math as much as I do, the square root of 2 is not rational. But some models will happily provide you a proof that it is, even though that's just false, right? And we wouldn't assign a CVE ID for that, right? Your model doing something that it's not supposed to happens, right? It's when it has a security impact that we might start to care about it. So continuing on the progress that we've made so far, I also want to shout out the CWE working group on AI. So we have this CWE 1426, which is the improper validation of generative AI output. And so a question becomes, should assignment be possible for unintended access to reasoning, right? And this is kind of a tough question because, again, thinking about generative AI and large language models, not classifiers, right? LLM providers aren't really specific about what they will not generate. So they'll tell you a little bit about, what its intended function is, some caveats. Usually these things are provided on what's called model cards, and model cards are written by some technical people and a bunch of lawyers. And so they tend to be pretty broad in their claims, and they're generally not specific about, we will not generate code with backdoors written into it, right? Maybe ZX was in your training data and you will. It's possible. So if an LLM violates an explicit or implicit security policy, it could warrant a CVE assignment. And again, this becomes a question of whether it's the model itself or whether it's the broader system. Where does that assignment go, right? So if the model that you're using is provided by OpenAI or Meta or Google, but you work for NVIDIA, or MITRE or F5 or wherever, right? And you're putting out software that contains one of these models. Where should that go? And there's a lot more, right? So we've had some assignments of CVE records. One of them is on the Proofpoint email security appliance. And essentially it was that the model was stolen by running attacks against it and then generating a copycat model. And then you could use that copycat classifier to craft an email that would get past this, right? And now generally security bypasses are not CVEable. So open question. On the other hand, we've seen targeting of things like, Shadow Ray is what they're calling it. The CVE 2023-48022, where this is a piece of AI-specific software for deploying models and hosting models and serving them that essentially is being exploited, right? Now, this is not model specific, but we're definitely seeing targeting of AI infrastructure and AI models. So, with that, I will happily take your questions. I've only got a 15-minute slot, so I wanted to leave a few minutes for Q&A.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks for that warm-up introduction to the AI, the new working group. Like all the other working groups, folks are welcome to reach out to us if you're interested in joining. Please bring your expert opinions and so on. I think Eric, as the chair, will welcome you, and we need the participation. And take as long as you want right now, Eric, because we're
Yeah.
up towards the end of the day if you need to go extra.
I think I'm all done on my slides, but there is one that is not in the QA, but it's in the chat from Mike. Right, is code that comes out of an LLM considered software, or should it be treated like code in books and such that isn't built/deployed? And this is one of those tricky scenarios, right? So if all you have is an LLM and you're running inference against your LLM, and I, as a developer, am using a ChatGPT-like thing or a GitHub Copilot type thing that generates code for me. Well, I think that's kind of like code in books, right? It's kind of like, as Todd just said, copy pasting from Stack Overflow, right? Now, if you integrate that into an agentic system, right, a system where the language model can then call tools, it can generate code and then compile it, or more often execute it through some kind of like Python interpreter. Everything in AI is built on top of Python. So if you're a Python lover, it's a target-rich environment. So at that point, right, it's an application that is dynamically generating something to execute and then executing it. So it becomes a little bit less clear whether it's more similar to, code in a book or on Stack Overflow versus part of the program logic, right? Yeah, and that's really tricky. I think with large language models in particular, the rule of thumb that I offer people is that the response you get from a large language model is approximately equivalent in quality to like the first or second most highly upvoted response on a Reddit thread for the same topic. Yeah. And George, I see your question. That's not a question for me.
Oh, the program logistical question, you bet. And yes, when you go to CVE.org and you look at program organization working groups page and you see the wonderful list of working groups that you can join, yes, the link takes you to cveforum.miter.org, and you can click other. There's a couple of options in the drop down there. Your message about you want to join a working group will get to us and we'll process it. Thank you.
Beautiful. Well, I think that takes me to my time because I have until 1:30. So
terrific. Thanks a bunch,
everybody
Eric.
for your time. I really appreciate it.